Hey, what's going on, everybody, and welcome back to my channel, Movie Files. Elliot back again with a brand new early movie review, and this is a big one because this film wasn't only on my most anticipated movies of this year, but it was also on my list last year. And I'm talking about, let me make sure there's no mirrors or anything around here. Talking about Candyman, ladies and gentlemen, which I got a chance to check out early, and I'm just so excited to share my thoughts with you all and let you know if it's worth checking out in this spoiler-free review. Before we break it all down, do me a favor and check me out on all my other social media accounts. If you're new to the channel, well, welcome to the community. Consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that notification bell. That way you can get the alert from when I drop new content. If you all enjoyed this spoiler-free review of Candyman, well, make sure to like and share the video. It helps out the channel so much, but I also appreciate all the support. And in those comments, let's talk about a couple things. Number one, have you seen the 1992 Candyman? Have you seen the sequels? What was your excitement, your anticipation level for this film? And once you've seen the movie, we gotta talk about it. Let's talk about your pros and cons and everything in between, from direction, cinematography, score, performances, the narrative, the kills, the horror elements, the continuation of the character's legacy. But let's also talk about some cons. Did the film not work for you? Were you not scared? Were you disappointed? Let's talk about it all in the comments below. So for me personally, 1992's Candyman, to me, has to be one of the most underrated slasher films of all time. I think that film not only holds up so well, I just watched it a couple weeks ago, such a fantastic movie. Tony Todd, the gore, the blood, the guts, the legacy, the lore, being from Chicago, the urban legend of Candyman, man, listen, I love me some Candyman. The sequels, not that great, but the original, fantastic horror film. Do yourself a favor if you haven't seen it. But nonetheless, going into this movie, Nia DaCosta, I'm a big fan of hers. Jordan Peele being a producer and having his hands in the screenplay. And then the talent in front of the camera. You give me Yahya Abdul-Mateen II. You give me my girl Teyonah Parris. And then my main man, Colman Domingo. Listen, I was beyond excited to see this film. And here we are discussing it, starting off my positives. First and foremost, being a fan of Candyman. The first half of this film, the setup of this film, to me was flawless. The way that the film builds on the urban legend and knows the legacy, which is such a big part of this film, the legacy that comes with Candyman and his legacy on the community of Cabrini Green, and just building that lore and the way that they continue to dive deeper into Candyman, to me was, again, I think that the first half of this movie, the setup, I'm not going to lie, I thought it was completely flawless, and I thought that the first half and the establishment of the setup of the story was flawless in my opinion, which brings me into how this film kind of tackles the themes that we see that are really handled well. Number one, gentrification, how this film talks about, again, legacy, and how people that are in these positions in the hoods of Chicago and other different urban areas, how people wipe out history. And that's something that's obviously big into the lore of Candyman, the wiping out, the forgetting the history and forgetting the name and say my name. And that's something that I thought was handled really well in this film, as well as the way that this film tackles generational black pain and black trauma was really handled well. And again, it ties so perfectly into who Candyman is and where he comes from and how the name gets forgotten about and the legacy gets forgotten about. So I love how this film tackles all those themes. And there's many other things, but those themes really stand out to me. But I want to talk about the woman behind the camera who I am such a big fan of. I'm talking about Nia DaCosta. I think she is a force to reckon with. She is not in the bracket quite yet, but she's getting there based on what I've seen with her first film, Little Woods, and now this, and then hopefully with Captain Marvel 2. I think she is almost on the cusp of being in the bracket of black filmmakers in this generation. Ava DuVernay, Ryan Coogler, Barry Jenkins, Steve McQueen, Jordan Peele himself. I think that she is getting that conversation, and the way that she kind of tackles this story through her lens from a perspective of a black woman in horror, which is extremely rare, may I say, and we need more black women and more black directors tackling this genre in particularly. But in regards to Nia DaCosta, I found her creative choices to be really distinct, and that's what I love about her as a director. She has a style to her, and I thought that the way that she was able to handle the story and the way that she used the camera and the way that she conveyed the flashbacks and conveying the story of Candyman through the paper mache was not only great but very creative. So again, Nia DaCosta, Captain Marvel 2, fingers crossed, but also I would love to see her tackle more horror stuff in the future. I thought that she was a really great director, which brings me to other production things that I adored about this film. My man that did the composing of this film, Robert A. Lowell, did such a fantastic job of making me feel uneasy. Very eerie, very haunting score. The score is fantastic in this movie, and also the sound design is incredible. So production-wise, two thumbs up for me. But let's transition into the performances here. I'm not gonna lie, like as I had mentioned, I'm a big fan of the talent involved in this film, and I have to say, performances were fine. No one blew me away, but I thought that everyone did the job that they were given, and I thought that they did a good job in their roles. You know, whether it be Nathan Stewart-Jarrett, Teyonah Parris, Colman Domingo, all fine characters, really solid performances. But like I said, none of them really like blew me away, and that brings me to the lead of this film, the young lion himself, Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, who plays Anthony, who is an artist who is just like connected to the story of Candyman and dives deep into Candyman. And he's in this position in his life where he is an artist, a starving artist who's living with his girlfriend, Brianna, played by Teyonah Parris, and he's someone that really hasn't been in the limelight for a while, so he's really connected to the story. And I thought that seeing Anthony's descent into madness was very believable, conveyed really well by Yahya, and seeing that transition, him being this man so infatuated with the story and having the story consume him, having this legacy consume his day-to-day life. I thought that he conveyed that pretty well. So again, wasn't blown away by anyone, but I thought that they were all solid in their roles. Which, going to the horror element of this film, I gotta mention, this is in the trailer, this isn't a spoiler, but I thought that the way that Nia DaCosta shot the bathroom scene was one of my favorite sequences in the entire movie. And kind of, you know, the horror elements, which we'll talk about, which let's go ahead and transition to. Those are my pros. Let's talk about my criticisms. Being the horror fan that I am, especially slashers, I always judge my horror films off of the first kill. Unfortunately for me, the first kill, where it takes place in the film and the characters involved, the line delivery and the performances were very underwhelming, and the horror in this film to me, and listen, coming as a horror fan, I'm 50-50 on this narrative, and this conversation at hand when it comes to horror. The argument about what you don't see can be just as scary as what you do see. And in this case, in this film, I wanted to see the kills. I want to see the brutality, the nature of the kills. And there's a lot of the times where Nia DaCosta, and I think is very deliberate in how she shot the horror and how she handled it. It's a creative choice that I just didn't agree with. I wanted to see more from the horror. Again, if you go back to that 1992 film's Candyman, it was bloody. It was gory. I mean, the rock rally, the scene in the bathroom, there's some iconic horror moments in that film. And when you compare this film in regards to how they handle the horror, again, it's a creative choice. I just wasn't a fan of how she handled it. Again, it's a lot of times where you don't see a lot of the kills. A lot of times the camera pans extremely out when you don't see all the brutality of what's going on the screen. So I just wasn't a fan of how they tackled the horror just in general. And again, if you compare it to the original, the horror is kind of lacking in that department to me personally, which brings me into the actual narrative and the main plots that we get in the film. Again, you have Jordan Peele, who I'm a big fan of. I love me some Jordan Peele. And you can see some of the Jordan Peele's influences in the screenplay, in particular when I think of how they handle the acknowledgement of characters who don't do certain tropes in horror films. I really enjoy that kind of comedic elements of the film, but also, you know, Nia DaCosta and when Rosenfeld wrote this screenplay, and I felt like the plot involving the art scene to me felt a bit uneven, as well as I get why they wanted to use art as like a main plot in this film. Obviously, art comes with history and obviously people being inspired by what came before, and obviously ties into Candyman itself, but the art, implementing the art scene to this film felt like a little bit of, if you all saw this film a couple years ago on Netflix, Velvet Buzzsaw, it kind of felt like that to me, which I wasn't a fan of that film, so I wasn't really that interested in the art, how they implement that aspect to the film, which brings me to a character, Brianna, played by Teyonah Parris. Her story and how she's connected to art was very underwhelming and went absolutely nowhere, in my opinion, which was unfortunate because it was something very interesting in her backstory, but they just didn't dive deep enough for me and her connections to the art scene, which also brings me into our main relationship between Anthony and his girlfriend, Brianna, you know, Yahya and Teyonah Parris. Again, really good performances. I thought their chemistry was there, but I just never felt their connection as a couple, especially when the film unfolds and things start to unfold and things starts to take place and you want to root for the characters in regards to the relationship, but I never felt that relationship from those two characters, which brings me to my biggest flaw of this film. The third act, it doesn't crawl, it doesn't walk, it is a full-on sprint off of the cliff for me in the third act of this film when it comes to concluding the story and the way the film handles some pretty big reveals, which as a fan of this franchise and seeing the trailer a couple years ago, I kind of knew where things were headed, but when the film gives you the reveals, I mean it, guys, it runs to the finish line. Like, when you get these reveals and you get the conclusion of the story, the third act to me is the weakest element of this film, which I hate to say that because it was shaping up to be something really interesting, but I go back to the third act again. I just feel like they rushed everything in that third act of the film, and when it comes to certain plots of the movie, to me personally, I feel like the film was a product of when it was shot, which was in early 2019, and the film kind of injects some social commentary, which just didn't mesh well with how the narrative was kind of telling, which kind of brings me again to one of my biggest flaws with this movie. To me, this film it's at odds with each other. I feel like the narrative at hand and also continuing the legacy of Candyman just didn't mash well for me personally. You really see that highlighted pretty poorly in the third act of the film, which brings me to, no spoilers, the last shot of the movie. As a fan of Candyman and the legacy and the lore and the urban legend, it was a very cool shot to end the film, but it just kind of felt a little bit underwhelming and also kind of felt a little bit empty all at the same time. So those are my main criticisms with the movie before I give you all my overall thoughts and my score. And if you should see Candyman, if you all have stayed this far to the video, I appreciate you. Make sure if you haven't already to like the video, share the video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and of course subscribe to the channel. Overall, as a fan of 1992 Candyman, I won't say I was disappointed by this film, but I will say I was underwhelmed by the movie. Now, I do applaud the creative direction by Nia DaCosta. I thought the performances were really solid. I thought that the narrative of gentrification and black trauma and black pain and generational pain was handled pretty well in the film, but unfortunately, the setup was so intriguing, but the payoff to me, when we get to that third act, it just fell off the cliff and it just felt so rushed. But at the end of the day, I can find more positives and negatives. I got the opportunity to have the screener, so I do plan on rewatching this again. But as I stand right now recording this video, I'm going to give Candyman a 3 out of 5. I got to say, in regards to if it's worth seeing in theaters, I think so. I think there is again, if you are not a horror fan, I think you will be able to watch this movie because I don't think it resonates in the horror genre for me. It isn't a horror film in that sense, especially compared to the 92 version. But I think there's still a good narrative, some really good performances, solid performances, really solid direction, and has some really good things to say. But again, it was lacking in the story, and also that third act to me as a fan of this franchise just didn't really work for me. But again, I give it a 3 out of 5, and that's just my thoughts. I want to know your thoughts. Once you all have seen the film, again, share your pros, your cons, your thoughts on the performances, the narrative. How'd you feel about the third act? How'd you feel about the last scene in the film? And let's have some dialogue about it. Again, for every single one of you all that is stuck on to this point of the video, thank you so much. Again, remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. That way you don't miss any of my other future content. Hope you all enjoyed this review. Hope you're staying safe. Don't look in the mirror and don't say the name of this movie 5 times because it won't end well for you. But this has been my review for Candyman. Hope you all are staying safe, and we'll see you on the next video.